And I know many folks are probably familiar with Zoom at this point, but we're going to go over a few basic controls. So everyone is muted to start. During the discussion time, you can raise your digital hand to join the queue, and we will go in sequential order. When it is your time to talk, we will unmute your microphone. If you're joining by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. The Zoom control panel is at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can use nonverbal feedback at any time during the meeting. You can leave a chat in the chat box, and someone on our team will respond to you if they're able. And we'll also aim to get to questions that are put into the chat during the Q&A session. You are also welcome to use emoji reactions at any time if you would like. You can access the chat box where it says chat, and you can access the hand raise and the emojis where it says raise hand. If you're joining on a smaller screen, you may see this as a ellipses option where you'll find these controls. I'm going to turn it over now to Chief Yasha Franklin Hodge.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Nathaniel. I am Yasha Franklin Hodge. I'm the city's chief of streets, and I oversee the city's public works and transportation departments. I'm joined here by a number of my colleagues from the city. I think we have about a dozen people on. You will see them identified in their name in the chat as with their affiliation. But the primary presenters tonight will be our Deputy Chief of Streets for Infrastructure and Design, Julia Campbell, and Nathaniel, who you have already met. But we have a number of subject matter experts on tonight to be able to help answer questions or dive in on any details. I'm going to just give a few very brief opening remarks, and then I'm going to invite the elected officials who are on the call to speak for a few minutes as well. The big picture is there's a lot of projects that the city has going on in the Back Bay. And so tonight, what we're going to do is provide construction updates for projects where the design is complete and they're moving towards construction, and share some ideas for a revised approach to some of the projects that were discussed last year. We value the feedback that we get from our communities, and we got a lot of it last year, especially around some of the bike projects. Our goal is to be responsive and to try to incorporate that feedback that we've gotten from all those different stakeholders. I will say we feel like our designs have improved as a result of that feedback, and we hope that you will also see progress in what we're presenting today. But we know that continued feedback is important, and so I'm excited to hear the comments and questions that folks have, and as we work towards projects that will be hopefully ready to build. So with that, I will, I think, I saw Councillor Durkin and Representative Livingstone on the call. And if there's any other elected officials, I believe we have a representative, Indus Johnson from Councillor at Large Henry Santana's office is on. If there's any other representatives from elected officials, please just drop your name in the chat so folks know you're here. And with that, I will turn it over to Councillor Durkin.
Sorry, guys, I was unable to unmute. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Chief. I really appreciate your comments. And I'm really excited to see community here. And I'm really excited by the folks who have partnered with community to make all of these projects better. Don't want to steal the show at all from what's in store, but I think all of the projects that have edits on them, I think they look a lot better. In terms of, I know there's been a lot of conversation about the Beacon Street AB block. I think that side of the street is a better side of the, I think, sorry, I don't want to steal the show with any of the changes, but I just want to say there's been a lot of feedback, a lot of conversation. My office, and particularly, I'm not sure if Tony is on for my office, but we've gotten a lot of feedback, I wanted to mention that our ONS liaison for most of District 8, Mackin Bonner, is on this call. So after the call, if you have any feedback for us, we're happy to hear it. I think through this community process, I think the plans that are about to be presented are much better, and also want to share just the particular nod to pedestrian safety that's been given in the Back Bay. It's actually part of District 2, but I know there's been a lot of advocates who've advocated for work to be done in the Back Bay, both my residents and residents of Councillor Flynn's district. So thank you so much, and I'll pass it off to Rep. Jay Livingstone.
Thank you. Thanks to Yasha and the other people from the city for hosting this. I think, as Councillor Durkin said, I hope people will appreciate the changes. I think I also want people to know the mayor was personally involved in this. Last summer, she walked around Beacon and Berkeley with the chief of streets, myself, and other members of the community to understand the community concerns. And I think that conversation, the other conversations, and especially since Councillor Durkin was elected, her involvement have led to what I think is a better result. And I hope people appreciate that. There's some projects that weren't discussed before, and tonight is going to be a start of a conversation about that. And I look forward to hearing what people have. Tonight is also my 9th anniversary, and so I'm going to go to dinner. But my staff, my chief of staff, Cassidy, is on. She put her information in the chat, and we'll be happy to work with you if you have thoughts on ways to improve this even more, and continue to partner with the city and Councillor Durkin. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Councillor and Representative. Really appreciate you being here and offering those remarks. And I see we've got a number of other representatives on. I don't see any other elected officials on at the moment. So I will turn this over to our Deputy Chief of Streets, Julia Campbell, who I think will, if we get the slides back up, we'll take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Chief, and thanks for everybody for attending this evening. Okay, I think we're ready for the agenda on the next slide. Great. So like the Chief said, we do have a lot that we want to talk with you all about tonight. And so we've broken it into pieces to try to make it as easy to understand as possible. And we hope to frame the discussion at the end that is also in a way that we can have discussions about individual issues as best as possible. So right now we're on number 1, we're doing our introductions. I am going to run us through, kind of the framing for how the cabinet is approaching this work, as well as the projects that are ready for construction. Those are the ones that design is all done. These should be projects that you have heard about before, and they're going to be entering into construction very soon. I will then be handing it off back to Nathaniel. And as our team's lead planner in this effort, he's going to be walking us through the design, both for projects that have changed that you have seen before, as well as new projects that maybe you haven't seen before. And then we'll have a quick wrap up where we talk about next steps, and then we have plenty of time for discussion. Next slide. All right, so getting into it, we are Boston's street cabinet, and we are the couple of departments, Public Works and Transportation, responsible for our streets and our public right-of-way. What we do through our work is we make streets safe and welcoming for all people, for all ages and abilities, and regardless of mode. That's really what we're trying to do with any time we touch a street or change a street. Our goal is to have streets and sidewalks have a state of good repair and to be functional, to work well for everybody, and to also to reflect each neighborhood. And that's why we're having this discussion with you all. Next slide. In all of the work that we do, safety is at the forefront. If you see us make a change to a street, chances are that we were making a change to make it safer. Pretty much everything that we do is with this in mind. We are a city that has adopted a Vision Zero goal. That means that we have adopted a citywide policy in the pursuit of reducing serious injury and deaths on our streets to zero. And our goal year for that is 2030. The main policies and the main ways that we do this is by focusing on the most vulnerable road users. So if we make our streets safer for people walking, people biking, people using two-wheeled or very small vehicles, that actually makes the street safer for everybody, including people in cars. One of the other main principles that we use is that if vehicles are traveling at speeds below 25 miles an hour, that street is going to be safer for everybody. So these are just core principles, including making it easier for pedestrians to cross streets. So shorter crossing distances actually reduces the risk that pedestrians have, like their exposure is reduced. So it's actually a safer street when they have less distance to cross. All of these things we've employed across the various projects that we're going to talk about today. Next slide. You're also going to hear us talk about bikes a lot today. And the reason for that is most of the streets that we have, especially, just a few years ago, didn't have bike infrastructure on them. So what we're doing is we're adapting streets across the whole city to more modern ways, and that includes changing them to include bike lanes sometimes. So today we will talk about bikes a fair amount. We are talking about creating a network so that we have a connected series of facilities where people can actually use bike lanes to get from one place to another to get to where they need to go, so that it can actually be a viable form of transportation. We're pretty excited about the network that we're talking about in the Back Bay. And we are really grateful for the feedback that we received last year and that we've responded to in some of the designs that you'll see today. We think it's actually helping us to make a really good network. And next slide. And so, what are we doing here? For the Back Bay, we recognize that this is a part of the city where walking comes first. This is an area of the city that is very dense. There is a lot of dense residential area as well as mixed use, commercial. It's the heart of the city in terms of tourism and people coming in and out and going to different destinations when they come from all over the world. We understand that most people are accessing, these destinations that they come from across the world to get to in Boston on foot at some point. They're accessing the public gardens. They're accessing, any sort of the tourism centers. They're getting on and off buses. They're riding bikes. We understand that that's actually the core of how people are traveling. Every time somebody gets on and off transit, they are also a pedestrian at some point. We've also heard, and we see every day, that curbside access is very important to the functioning of businesses in the Back Bay, and that limited curb space is really valuable. We understand that that's something that's in high demand, and a lot of the changes that we're going to be making are intended to actually help the curbside function better, bringing some organization and bringing some priority to the people who need to get access, get in, get out, so that our businesses can function. So lastly, we will be talking about bikes, but we understand the core is pedestrians. And every time that we do put a bike facility in place, we are also accommodating pedestrian safety at the same time. Next slide. Okay, so among the many projects that we're going to be running through today, some of them you might have heard about as far back as 2019. Most of the Better Bike Lane projects that we're talking about today were announced by Mayor Wu in fall of 2022. And you probably heard from us or talked with us, met us in the street in one of our pop-up events last year in the spring and summer when we did a lot of outreach about these projects. So thank you if you did talk to us before. Next slide. And what did we hear from you? We heard all ends of the spectrum. We heard that people were really excited about changes to the streets, really pushing for safety. A lot of people really excited about bike lanes and being able to feel safer riding bikes. We also heard a lot of concern about change and, you know, what are these changes going to mean for me? Am I going to be able to go about my daily business? So these are some of the comments that we're doing our best to kind of encapsulate into just a few points that I'll run through very quickly. We heard concern about maintaining infrastructure for pedestrians and drivers. We heard questions about, you know, are there other bike routes that we could consider different from the ones that we were proposing last year? And the answer to that is actually yes. So thank you for those comments last year, and we'll show you those changes in a few slides. We heard some questions about, would adding separated bike lanes add congestion to busy streets? This is a really tricky one. You know, a lot of time, the traffic that we experience on local streets isn't caused by local destinations. Sometimes it's caused, a lot of the time it's caused by people passing through in vehicles to get to different destinations that are actually outside the neighborhood. We have done traffic analysis of everything that we're proposing to do in the neighborhood, and we do not think that any of the changes that we're proposing are going to significantly change today's traffic. It might not significantly make it better, but it's not going to make it significantly worse either. The last couple of questions were about avoiding complexity to already kind of confusing and complex situations that are out there, especially at intersections. We definitely understand that question, and we've done our best to try to actually simplify things. And so some of the changes that you'll see will actually be to that point as well. And this last question is kind of that curbside access question of maintaining parking and curbside access for residents, businesses, and institutions. Yes, we agree, and we've made some changes that we think are going to allow some more meaningful curbside access and be less disruptive to the parking and curbside access for residents and businesses, as well as institutions in the neighborhood. Next slide. Okay, so this is actually new. We haven't talked about this in this forum before. In addition to the mobility projects that we're proposing and moving forward with in the neighborhood, we recognize that a lot of the streets in the Back Bay are in need of repair. In order to bring them up to a state of good repair, every line on this map represents an action that we will be taking to bring streets up to state of good repair. The black lines are paving streets, and the red lines are working on sidewalks. Blue lines are also paving, but that's just under a separate project. So this is actually quite a lot of lines in one neighborhood. We feel confident bringing this amount of work into the Back Bay because the density of use is so high here. Also, everywhere that we do paving, we will be upgrading sidewalk curb ramps to be ADA compliant. So we're going to be talking through some of this more, but some of these streets also overlap with some of the mobility changes that we want to make for bike lanes and bus lanes. And we've thought about this quite a lot. We actually did this analysis across the whole city, and this is just a snapshot of the Back Bay. But this year, anytime where we're going to be putting in a bike or bus lane, we've thought about if the quality of that pavement needs to be improved. And so these are the places where we want to bring things into a state of good repair. We will be starting all of these projects or all of these areas and streets this year. But as construction goes, we can't always predict the future or how weather is going to go or how emergencies might happen with our utilities. So if we don't finish any of these this year, they will be first on our list in the next season for 2025. But all of these are funded. We are moving forward with all of them. Next slide. All right, and so this is a second map that shows the mobility projects. The first group, if you look to the left side of this slide, where we say design completed, these are projects that should not be new to you. These are projects that we have been talking about for a few years. And these are ones that are getting ready for construction right now. We're just getting our contracts in order, mobilizing our contractors. The construction season just began a couple of weeks ago, and these ones are going to be entering into construction very soon. If you have questions about these first three projects, being Boylston, Berkeley, or Clarendon, at the end of the presentation, we're going to have a breakout group just for those ones. So if you have construction questions about how are we going to be phasing this work, or concerns about, what's going to happen when we need to close down the street to do work on it, that's going to be the place to go. If you've got questions about that, we will have a place for that. The rest of this presentation is going to be about design and projects that are still in design phase right now. As you can see, some of them are new. So we're going to be talking to you about some new things on Dartmouth Street, Dartmouth and Stewart, and we've made some changes to Beacon Street and Arlington Street. Where it says here in the first group that we've made a change to the Berkeley Street Better Bike Lane project, that's because we took the feedback we received last year, and we will not be bringing the bike lane as far north as we had proposed last year. Go to the next slide. All right. And so now I'll run through just quickly the projects that design is all done, and they're going to be entering into construction in the next few weeks. And you can go to the next slide. Here is a map of just those projects. So Boylston Street is going to be receiving a separated bike lane, as well as two types of bus lanes. So a peak hour bus lane and an all-day bus lane, as well as one block from our team of sidewalk reconstruction. There will also be sidewalk reconstruction on the other side of this block, done by the Parks Department on a separate timeline. The way that this is going to work on Boylston is our contractor is going to be going through with the installation of the different lanes first, and then that same contractor, as soon as they're done with the lane work, they're going to begin work on the sidewalk reconstruction from Dartmouth to Clarendon. So it'll be one continuous flow of construction. Then we also have Berkeley Street Bike Lane and Clarendon Bus Lane. Again, if you have any questions about these ones, there will be a breakout group. We can go to the next slide, and we'll just highlight a few elements of each of these projects really quickly. So just as a reminder, these should not be new. These are projects that we've talked about for quite some time, but just as a reminder, we've got our bike lane, different kinds of bus lanes. We still retain two lanes for automobile traffic. And this also will include some signal work and rebuilding the sidewalk. We can go to the next slide. Berkeley Street, we're going to be repaving part of this street. Again, that does include upgrading the curb ramps to be ADA compliant. And this is, of course, to install our separated bike lane. There's going to as well be some signal changes here. And we can go to the next slide. Clarendon Street, later this year, this is actually going to formalize and make permanent a bus lane that we first began running in the 2022 Orange Line shutdown. This is going to include, again, some repaving, upgrading those curb ramps, and this is going to serve routes 39 and 55 from the T-bus. We'll go to the last slide in this section. So in the very first part of our construction season, we're going to be doing the Boylston Street work, and that again includes the bike lane, the bus lane, and the reconstruction of the sidewalk. And the other projects will follow after that. We do not have exact dates for all of this work right now. This is something that we don't even know the exact date because we are finalizing the contracts with our contractors. Again, if you have questions, please go to the breakout session. And if you would like to get the updates about when this work will be happening, please go to our website, get on the email list for that, and we will let you know when the work is ready and coming. Okay, and with that, I will pass it to Nathaniel to talk about projects that are in design.
Okay, hello everybody. Can I get a thumbs up that you can hear me? Cool. Thank you. Okay. So thank you, Deputy Chief Campbell. As she mentioned, the previous projects that were just discussed are ones where the design is complete and we're moving into the construction phase. I'm going to be talking about some projects where we are still working to fine-tune the design and to get the details right. And this is important because we want to share back with you some changes that we have proposed to designs that many of you may have seen last year. And we want to hear what you think about them. We want to work through some of the questions you have, and we want to talk a little bit more about things that we incorporated from your feedback, as well as things that we feel need to still be included in the project in order to advance our safety goals, our mobility goals. And I'm going to move on to Beacon Street and Arlington Street. These are kind of right on the edge of the Back Bay and the public garden. And the block of Beacon Street in between Arlington Street and Berkeley Street right now is a gap in the bike network. As Julia mentioned, we are going to be talking quite a bit about bikes, but I just want to kind of reiterate that all of the changes that we make incorporate considerations for all users, in particular pedestrians are primary when we are looking at retiming intersections, when we're looking at separated bike lanes. They really can help narrow the roadway so that the exposure to vehicle traffic is reduced. So with that in mind, I'm going to dive in a little bit more on this. So we really do want to close this gap in the bike network. And the previous proposal that we had with the bike lane going north on Berkeley Street to Beacon Street was intended to be able to get folks to connect over to the Fiedler Footbridge, which is a natural destination where folks can connect over to the Charles River Path system. So some of the feedback that we heard last year was generally centered around this concern for safety at the intersection of Berkeley and Beacon Street in particular. This is an intersection where two heavy streams of traffic are coming in, both from Berkeley Street and from Beacon Street, and trying to turn onto Sturrow Drive. And because of those heavy traffic flows, we sometimes get long queues. And sometimes we get frustrated drivers that are behaving in ways that we do not want them to be behaving. And so I know many folks have talked to us about that. We know it's an issue. We know you know it's an issue too, because you live there and you see it every day. So chief among these issues is how can we improve safety there? We also heard feedback from both residents and Fisher College and other institutions in the area that our initial proposal, which would have eliminated parking on one side of this block of Beacon Street, as well as the blocks of Berkeley Street between Com Ave and Beacon Street. We heard feedback about that and a concern for the loss of parking. We also know that the road is in bad shape, and we want to improve that road surface. And then lastly, in our neighborhood conversations, we heard questions and comments about other potential streets in the Back Bay network that could serve as routes for bicycling. So I am going to start by showing what our initial design proposal was last year. Just a few features of this so you can see towards the left of the screen that we were proposing to have a separated bike lane coming north on Berkeley Street to Beacon Street. On Beacon Street, we would have had a two-way bike lane going along the northern curb where there's currently parking. And then at the intersection of Mugar Way, we would have had a crossover. So bicyclists going westbound would have crossed over there and continued westbound. Bicyclists going eastbound to the Fiedler Footbridge would have at that point been advised to walk their bikes over to the footbridge. And this is the revised design proposal. I am going to walk through various different features of this as they apply to various different modes of transportation in the area. So feel free to take a look now, but I will be diving in quite a bit more, and we will certainly have the opportunity to talk through any of these things in the Q&A. And we will also be posting this information on the website for your individual consumption later. Okay, so let's talk about pedestrians. One of the key changes here is that we're actually proposing a change to 2 lanes going westbound on Beacon Street. That right lane would be a through right lane. I will get to it in a few slides to talk about traffic capacity, because I know the question of changing the number of lanes can be a concern. But right now I'm going to talk about why we think this is going to improve the safety situation. So right now, because of the queuing, there is sometimes frustrated drivers, and they actually have the ability to cut to the front of the queue. That's because there is a center lane that is supposed to be a through lane that folks use to cut off and get ahead of the right turning traffic that is waiting in the right turn lane. With a through right lane combined, we think that this is going to make it harder for drivers to turn when they're not supposed to. During this, or within the phasing of the signals at this intersection, we want to introduce an exclusive pedestrian phase. Many of you may be familiar with that type of phasing. We have this at many intersections. This is a time when all traffic has a red light, and it is the only time when pedestrians can go. And I would certainly be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the changes that we are proposing at Arlington Street, Beacon Street, and Mugar Way. We want to significantly simplify the crossings between the Public Garden and the Fiedler Footbridge access to the Esplanade. Right now, you have to cross through a small triangular island and end up waiting for a long time sometimes, and it can get very crowded in that island, and sometimes you have to wait there for a while. We want to make it so that you cross this intersection in 2 stages and really have those crossings lined up much more clearly with the desire lines of where you want to go. So it's going to bring you in a direct path onto the plaza at the landing of the Fiedler Footbridge. This will also come with intersection signal timing changes to facilitate the movement of all users through this intersection. So we will also have signals and crossings for people biking. And we will make sure that vehicle traffic is flowing through here as best as it possibly can, given the high volume that is seeking to access Sturo Drive. Okay. If you are biking, I'm going to start with the revisions to how we are proposing to get to the Fiedler Footbridge. So today, the bike lane along the Public Garden on Arlington Street is one-way southbound. We want to change that to be a 2-way bike lane. So you will be able to bike northbound to Beacon Street. At that point, there will be a series of marked crossings and signals that will allow you to cross both Arlington Street and Beacon Street to access the plaza in front of the Fiedler Footbridge. Previously, we would have had you coming up Berkeley Street and then turning right onto Beacon Street. Also, key feature of this is that we're proposing to move the bike lane on Beacon Street to the south side. One of the big advantages of that is that it avoids conflicts with the right-turning vehicles who are turning right from Beacon Street onto Berkeley Street to access Sturo. And then lastly, previously, we would have had you, if you're going westbound on Beacon Street, we would have had you crossing just west of the crosswalk at Mugar Way. In this revised proposal, you would cross Beacon Street to the north side just west of Berkeley Street. You'll also have a dedicated phase in which to do that. We do not want to leave you stranded there, of course. And then how this all kind of fits together. So this is a map showing connections going northbound for bikes to the Esplanade. So previously, we would have had one connection, which would have gone up Berkeley Street to Beacon Street, turned right, and then turned left onto the Fiedler Footbridge. We now have 2 different options if you're coming from the south, as well as the option of coming from points west along Boylston Street. And with the Dartmouth Street project, which I'm also going to get to in a few slides, There will also be the option to access the Dartmouth Street footbridge, both by going north on Berkeley Street to Comm Ave, or by coming eastbound on Boylston Street from the west, turning left on Dartmouth Street. So really, we're trying to stitch together all of these different connections. And while we do acknowledge that we are proposing to remove a link in the network that we were initially proposing, we really do feel like actually this is a better option because there's more options to filter through the street grid and to get to the various different points. Okay, parking. We know that there was a lot of concern about loss of parking in this area. And I can say with this revised proposal that we would be keeping parking on both sides of Berkeley Street in between Comm Ave and Beacon Street. We would also be keeping parking on both sides of Beacon Street in between Mugar Way and Berkeley. So while there will be some marginal reduction in parking spaces kind of right around the intersections and a few just west of Berkeley Street, the net change is significantly less than what we were initially proposing, and we're really striving here to maximize the number of parking spaces we can while still achieving these goals of connecting the bike network and keeping all travelers moving as safely as we can. Okay, traffic capacity. So as I mentioned previously, we are now proposing to have 2 lanes on Beacon Street westbound. The right lane will be for continuing straight and turning right, and the left lane will be for continuing straight only. On Berkeley Street, we're not proposing any changes to the number of lanes that are there today. And I want to just take a moment to talk about how we plan and design traffic signals. So we have standards and processes that we use when we're considering changes to any signalized intersection anywhere in the city. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but we do kind of generally follow a few steps. So first, we gather traffic data to understand the current conditions. The data that we used to model this particular intersection was collected in late 2022. We know that conditions can fluctuate throughout the time of year, and we also know that conditions have fluctuated quite a bit since the onset of COVID. Nonetheless, we are confident that data collected late in 2022 is generally still representative of traffic conditions. If we had collected this data in 2020, we would have definitely recollected it more recently. So that is our starting point for this analysis. We take the data that we collect and we use traffic modeling software to test out a variety of different scenarios. And when we do that, we are always taking into account not only the number of lanes, but how they're assigned. Are they a turn-only lane, or are they a shared through and turn lane, or are they a through lane only? As well as how long we are giving to each part of the phase, so to the pedestrian crossings, to each direction in the intersection. And ultimately, our goal is that we want to find a balance between safety and access, as well as keeping everybody moving as smoothly as we can. So I'm going to show the results of some of our modeling. So in the proposed condition, this is what we have modeled as the 50th percentile. So that's roughly about half the time. And the 95th percentile, so that's the vast majority of time. These are how long we expect the queues in the morning to be. Folks who live in this neighborhood will know that it's much busier in the afternoon, so I'm going to move on to that. So in the PM peak, you can see a little red line here that indicates where our model shows the current 95th percentile stretching back to. With the proposed condition on Beacon Street, you can see that it goes a teeny bit further back, but it's really not that significantly further. Now, we also know that there are times when not only Beacon Street, but Berkeley Street and Charles Street are all backed up. Sometimes Sturrow Drive is at complete crush capacity. And although we would like to keep folks moving through here, frankly, there is no amount of lanes we could add to Beacon Street and Berkeley Street that would facilitate that in those situations, right? Because you have all traffic basically filtering down to a single lane going on to Sturrow. And then if the road itself is already backed up, or say someone drove a truck onto Sturrow Drive and crashed into one of the bridges, there's any number of conditions that could result in that road being congested. So what we are trying to solve for is the vast majority of time when Sturrow is relatively free-flowing. And again, that is what we call the 95th percentile. So we acknowledge this is a model, but this is the method that we use to analyze before and proposed conditions and compare them to one another. I'm going to walk through the signal phasing, and that is what we're proposing at this intersection. So during the first cycle, this is when all Beacon Street westbound traffic would go, including right turns onto Sturrow Drive. During this phase, we can also have the southern crosswalk on walk because there are no conflicts across it. If you are biking, you will also go with this green, and then you will wait in a little staging area just on the west side of the intersection. So phase number 2 is a phase that will come up if you push the pedestrian button. If you do not, it'll go to phase 3. The reason for that is it allows us to basically have the model run a little bit more smoother. And if anyone is trying to cross on that northern crosswalk, or really any crosswalk, and pushes the button, this is the phase that will come on after Beacon Street has its green. So in this phase, all of the crosswalks are on. And if you're biking, you can then complete your crossing of Beacon Street onto the north side, where the protected bike lane will continue in the westbound direction. So cycle number 3 is when Berkeley Street traffic goes. So like I said, if no one pushes the pedestrian button, this will come on after phase 1. If it comes on after phase 1, you're going to get what's called a leading pedestrian interval, or a pedestrian head start. This is when the walk sign comes on a few seconds before the vehicles get their green. That allows pedestrians to become established in the intersection and be partially complete with their crossings before any traffic starts moving. Bicyclists should also have enough time, if they're waiting in the staging area, to complete their turn. And I just want to emphasize, leading pedestrian intervals are one of the safety features that we can implement, so that no matter what happens, whether or not someone comes to this intersection on foot and pushes the button, you will have a safer way to cross the street. So that brings us to a question that we are hoping to get to when we get to the Q&A. And thank you for bearing with me and for bearing with us, because we have a lot of content to get to. But when we get there, we really want to hear, do you think we're on the right track with this? We took a lot of your feedback into consideration. We even looked at some analysis that folks in the neighborhood did independently and considered their proposals. And we found, yes, this can work, and we can achieve still the goals of extending the bike network, as well as pedestrian safety, calming the vehicle traffic to the extent that we can, given the volume that is there, and preserving parking. We're going to continue to talk to you and answer your questions and fine-tune the details as we go forward. I also just want to note that the intersection of Arlington Street, Mugar Way, and Beacon Street is actually part of a project called Public Garden Crossings. It is technically a different project with a slightly different timeline, and it's going to be constructed under a different contract. So what this likely means is that we will get to Beacon Street from Mugar Way west before we get to that intersection of Arlington, Mugar, and Beacon. So the conditions we've been discussing that I've been showing with the more extended slides here, this reflects what the final condition will be. So I'm just noting that to set expectations. We are moving towards having this connection for pedestrians and bicyclists fully built, but it will be in different phases. Okay, Dartmouth Street at Stewart Street. I'm going to pause for a quick sip of water now. Okay, so the location of this project is at the corner of Stewart Street and Dartmouth Street. This is about 1 block away from Back Bay Station and about 2 blocks away from Copley Square. This is a really heavily used intersection for pedestrians. And based on feedback that we got from folks in the community, as well as from your elected leaders, we took a look at this intersection and we found that there are some quick build interventions we can do here. So some of the issues that you brought forward to us were that there are uncomfortable pedestrian crossings and there are high turning speeds for vehicles. And those are made possible by very wide turning lanes that are there today, built in the 50s and 60s to accommodate fast moving traffic, not as reflective of the dense urban environment that we have today. The data also bears this out. This intersection is a high crash intersection for all modes of travel based on our Boston Vision Zero Boston Vision Zero safety data. The timeline for this project, because it is a quick build project, is potentially 2024 construction, and if not, 2025. This is a preview of the design that we're working on. We're hoping to use quick build materials. Those are things like changing the roadway striping, changing the signage, and putting up flexible plastic barriers. What we can do is that we can actually shorten the pedestrian crossings on 3 out of the 6 crosswalks at this intersection. So the crosswalk across the northern leg, which allows drivers to turn from Stewart Street onto Dartmouth Street, we can make that about half the length that it is today. We can also shorten the main crosswalk across Stewart Street on the west side, as well as the crosswalk across the slip lane that allows you to turn from Stewart Street onto Dartmouth Street southbound. That can also be about half the length that it is today. These are quick fixes. We are also hoping to explore longer term fixes that would potentially involve bigger changes to this intersection. Some of those could potentially be partnerships with development that may or may not occur in this area in the foreseeable future. And then lastly, I will just add, there is a bike lane on this section of Stewart Street in between Huntington Ave and Dartmouth Street. And basically with the space that's left over from narrowing the vehicle lanes and narrowing the turning radiuses, we can provide a protected bike lane for that one block that gets you as far as Dartmouth Street. So this is an upgrade to an existing bike facility. Okay. So this is another new project. This came out of our conversations last year, both with the community as well as the feedback that you gave to your elected officials. And we are looking at a project to put a bike lane along Dartmouth Street in between Boylston Street and Back Street. So this is, like I said, this is new, and we're going to share some initial designs with you. And we are very interested to hear about your feedback and thoughts around the alternatives that we are, or the design alternative that we're proposing. So again, this is just some geographic orientation. The dark line here shows the location of the project in context with the neighborhood. So this would be between Boylston Street and Back Street. We are looking at a two-way bike facility here to provide a clear link, direct and legible connection in between Copley Square and the Esplanade that would serve tourists, shoppers, commuters, neighborhood residents, really anybody who is traveling in between the Charles River Path system and wants to get into the heart of the Back Bay. Some of the feedback that we heard last year centered around this idea that maybe Dartmouth Street could actually be a better route than Berkeley Street, which we had initially proposed, especially because, again, it connects you right into the heart of the neighborhood. We also know that we've got a lot of folks riding blue bikes in the area. Some of them don't know Boston very well. And sometimes you encounter them riding on sidewalks. And when we have separated bike lanes on our streets that people feel comfortable using, that draws people away from doing things like riding on sidewalks. We also know that we did propose removing a lot of parking last year when we were looking at the Berkeley to Beacon Street connection. And we think that this proposal on the net, we know that this proposal on the net does minimize the impacts to parking neighborhood-wide. This is another project that we could do in a relatively short amount of time because the design involves putting striping within the existing roadway. But I will also just note that this is a street that we would repave the roadway, and we would also be rebuilding the curb ramps along this corridor to ensure that they are accessible and meet our current ADA standards. So this is a preview of the design proposal. As I mentioned, we are looking at a two-way separated bike lane that would run along the east side of Dartmouth Street between Boylston Street and Beacon Street. We considered a variety of different options, but we feel that putting it on the east side makes the most sense because it has the fewest conflicts with turning vehicles. In particular, a lot of drivers turn left from Dartmouth Street northbound onto Comm Ave westbound. If the bike lane is on the east side, it completely avoids that turning conflict, and it makes us easier to integrate the bike lane into the existing signal pattern. It is also an easier connection to the soon-to-be constructed Boylston Street bike lane, and it is also a very direct connection from the footbridge right into Copley Square. We can also do this without changing any vehicle capacity. So this would remain 2 general travel lanes between Boylston Street and Marlborough Street, and 1 general travel lane from Marlborough to Beacon. We also have the very short block in between Beacon Street and Back Street, which is the last mile connection to the footbridge. And on this section, we would be installing a northbound contraflow bike lane. So this is a short section of bike lane where we put in striping and signage to indicate that bikes can flow in the northbound direction. In the southbound direction, because this is a very lightly traveled block for motor vehicles, we would have bikes sharing a general travel lane in between these 2 locations. So there is some impact to parking with this proposal, but as I said earlier, there is a significantly smaller net loss to parking throughout the neighborhood than we would be seeing in the previous proposal. So parking would remain on the west side of Dartmouth Street here. This is a preliminary estimate of the parking impact, and I just want to stress these figures are subject to change. We will be continuing to talk with you and walk through the different alternatives. And as we refine the design, these numbers could very well change. So I want to emphasize that this is a starting point. This is not written in stone in any sense of the word. So we'd be looking at a preliminary impact of about 31 to 39 spaces in between Boylston Street and Back Street. The very vast majority of these spaces are metered parking spaces during the day. Like I said, we can work with you to fine tune these curb regulations so that there's ample space for loading and pickup and drop off as appropriate. I'm not going to get too much into the various different alternatives that we considered when this proposal initially came to us. Folks initially recommended making the existing northbound bike lane, which is currently an unprotected bike lane, into a protected bike lane without having southbound traffic. But we do want to make sure that folks can travel southbound because if we don't, they're going to find their way probably to the wide sidewalk on Dartmouth Street or take any number of nearby streets or just simply not make the trip at all. So by putting a two-way facility, we can really channelize all of the demand onto one street. We also looked at a southbound protected bike lane on Exeter Street. But because of the various different engineering standards and emergency access requirements that we have to follow, we found that the impact to parking between those 2 streets would end up being 63 spaces. That's because we'd have to remove half of the parking on Exeter Street to make this happen. So we can actually preserve more parking in the neighborhood by having a two-way bike lane on Dartmouth Street. So again, we know this is the first you've seen this proposal. We know that some folks who have chatted with us previously may have had a different idea about what Dartmouth Street could look like. So we want to give time for folks to sit with these ideas and think about them and ask us questions and kind of go through a process of fine-tuning these designs. I will note, and we will share more about this later, we're going to have virtual office hours coming up, as well as other ways to chat with us and send in your feedback. So again, very bike heavy, I know. I'm going to show how these projects all fit together to form a more cohesive central city bike network that includes the Back Bay. So we really have made a lot of progress in expanding the network of safe and easy to use bike lanes through the city. But as you can see on this map, not all streets are covered. We really want to have bike lanes that are separated from traffic to the greatest extent possible so that more people feel comfortable using them for their daily trips. So the emerging bike network that encompasses the projects that we are talking about tonight looks something like this. Clearly, we have more work to do, and this is not necessarily the final product, but this is what it would look like if we were to implement what we have shown tonight. So we've got nearly 2 miles of new high comfort bike facilities that are coming in the next few years. And these would be filling gaps and helping to create a more connected network throughout the neighborhood. Okay, so we're going to move on to next steps now. So as Julia mentioned, construction will be starting soon on Boylston Street, Berkeley Street, and Clarendon Street. And we will be doing the state of good repair work throughout the construction season, which lasts from now until roughly late November. And those projects will be happening on an ongoing basis. We will probably not, I can say we will not be hosting big meetings like this for each of the repaving projects. What will happen is that the crews will notify abutters on the streets where they're going to be repaving, and they will put up temporary signs that will direct people what to do during those construction times. We know that can be inconvenient, but the result is that you will have a shiny, newly paved street and new curb ramps. And then we're also going to talk about ways that you can get in touch with us to share your feedback on the new projects we've talked about tonight. And again, this will be available on the website. We're going to post this presentation. You can send us an email at better-bike-lanes@boston.gov. We also have a new website that brings together all of the projects that we're working in the Back Bay. That is accessed at boston.gov/back-bay-streets. And we will be hosting virtual office hours. Those are going to be on Wednesdays. We're going to offer ones that are in the morning as well as in the evening. That's an opportunity where anyone in this meeting or really anyone in the public can sign up for a 15-minute time to talk with us either on a video chat or over the phone to discuss these design proposals, ask your question, share your feedback. We will have the specific dates and times listed on the website. The first one is going to be next Wednesday. We also have a Mayor's Neighborhood Coffee Hour that's coming up on June 18th for Back Bay and Beacon Hill. Okay. So breakout groups. As we previously mentioned, there will be 2 opportunities to either stay in this current Zoom room where you are now and talk about the designs that we are still working on. These are the design for Beacon Street between Mugar Way and Berkeley Street, Dartmouth Street at Stewart Street, and the 2-way protected bike lane on Dartmouth Street between Boylston and Back Street. We're also going to have a breakout room that you can opt into if you want to specifically talk about the upcoming construction on Boylston Street, Berkeley Street, and Clarendon Street. I'm just going to go back to a quick reminder again, because I know it's been a while since the start of the presentation on using your Zoom control panel. So again, we will have folks muted until it is their turn to speak, at which time you will be prompted to unmute. You can do so by hitting the unmute button. You are welcome to keep your camera off, or you can turn it on. You can do that with the start video button. If you want to post a question to the chat, if you haven't already done so, or you have more to add to what you've already shared, you can do so using the chat box. And the way to get into the queue to speak live to the group is to click on the reactions button and then click raise hand. We will go through the list in order in which people raise their hand. You are also welcome to add an emoji if you want. Totally up to you. And with that, I am going to be opening the breakout room. So again, please feel free to stay here if you want to talk about any of the design projects, and go to the construction room if you would like to talk about that. Please bear with me for just about a minute as we get these going. Okay, so folks should see an option to join a breakout room. If you don't, please go to the bottom right of your screen. There should be an ellipses that says more, and you can click on that and you should be able to access breakout rooms there. If you're having any tech issues, you can chat someone with the city directly on the chat feature. And I'm going to call to the front Anne Roach, who is with us on the city team. She's going to be facilitating the Q&A section of this main breakout room.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Roach. I'm the Communications Director for the Streets Cabinet. So what we're going to do is if you have a question you want to ask, please raise your hand. We'll ask you to unmute and you can ask your question. I'm going to ask if your comments are similar to a previous speaker to just sort of second those comments and bring up a new topic so we can keep time moving because there will be a lot of people who will be hoping to speak tonight. We'll also be answering any questions that haven't been yet answered in the chat. So Michael, if you'd like to start, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good. Thank you. This is the first, by the way, I really enjoyed the presentation. This is a big improvement over what you were showing us a year ago. So thank you for that. My question is, and it's also the first time I've seen anything approaching analysis from BTD in the Streets group. So my question, therefore, is when did you do the analysis that you showed us tonight? I know the data comes from October 2022. I want to know when the analysis was done.
Hi, Michael. I can answer that. The analysis for this has been done over the spring. I don't have a specific date when we started. It has been, touch and go as we need it. It's not the first thing we do. It's not the last thing to do. It's a thing we iterate as we go. We have been designing and working on this since February, I think. So the analysis could have been any time after that.
So you're saying it was done in the last couple of months?
For this specific setup, yes.
Okay. Okay, because I filed a public records request last August. I was told by the city's law department that you had nothing responsive to my request, which specifically asked about synchro traffic simulation studies. So are you telling me that you did no analysis last year and now for the first time in the last couple of months you've done it?
No, I believe I was told that by the other engineer working on this that you were provided with synchro outputs at some point in that analysis. Those did make it into the FOIA request. They were for the previous setup, not for this one. But what we have now too as well is for this, including what we had for that previous one, we will have the existing input data, as I said before, the October 2022 data, and we'll also have the synchro outputs up on our website when we have this recording put up as well. So all of that data will be made available free to everyone so that you can peruse it at your leisure.
Okay, it is not true that I was provided with synchro analyses. I was not. not for A to B Beacon. So that's just not true. But if you have it now, and if you're willing to share it, that is showing that BTD hopefully is turning a new leaf in terms of working with interested people in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Elliot, your question?
We will be posting that information online along with the presentation and the recording. Also, Dan, before we go on, Dan, can you just quickly introduce yourself and say who you are, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Dan. I've been the one furiously typing in the chat all evening so far. I did the design work on a lot of these. I am more than happy to answer anyone's questions about design, about safety, why we're going to do any of these lanes, all of those things. So, hi, I'm here.
We're happy you're here, Dan. Elliot, go ahead.
Okay, I'm Elliot Laffer. I live on Commonwealth Avenue, and I've been involved in these discussions for a long time. I want to first say thank you for listening and taking the bike lane off of Berkeley Street between Com Ave and Beacon. I know that required a substantial amount of discussion, including with the mayor, and appreciate that folks listened. Sounds like you're listening as well with an attempt to make a bike lane work on Beacon between A and B. The reason it hasn't been there all these years is because many people felt that it was almost impossible to make workable. One thing that will be critical and that probably doesn't pop up in the theoretical analysis that gets done, traffic analysis, is double parking. And at the point that you're down to 2 lanes, if somebody double parks, that leaves 1. And that's caused complaints from people on Beacon Street west of Berkeley, where there's a lot less traffic. On the block approaching Berkeley Street, a double parked car is the end of all motion, and we don't get a whole lot of enforcement of that sort of thing. And it's not just a ticket isn't going to do it. It's got to be something that makes it very clear that people can't park there. I want to say thank you for putting the bike lane on Dartmouth Street, which is a way better connection than Berkeley, because for one thing, it goes direct to the Esplanade. So that will hopefully work well. Always a challenge when you have to give us some parking spaces, but something's got to give somewhere. But I'm dubious of the success of the Arlington to Berkeley or Hugo way to Berkeley, depending on how you want to characterize it, bike lane once the first Amazon truck stops there. I think that's all that I have for now. But again, thank you for listening. It has been a serious effort, I think, on everybody's part to get to a point where folks feel heard, and it generally works better when we do. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to say very quickly, thank you for your comments. I want to just address the question about curbside access and double parking. One of the things and one of the tools we have in our toolkit is to change curbside regulations. And we are very interested in hearing from folks where they think things like short-term parking might be useful. We realize there's always a trade-off between longer-term parking when we do that. But to the extent that we can provide those places, that provides an opportunity for delivery vehicles to get out of the stream of traffic, especially on blocks such as the A to B block, where keeping that traffic moving is a critical concern. Dan, I wanted to say something.
I mean, that was half of what I wanted to say, was yes, to deal with that, we need to make short-term parking so that those people have places to go. And additionally, the traffic software that we do use does account for friction from parking vehicles. Obviously, if we have delivery vehicles double parked all day, that's going to be an extreme scenario. So the best part here is if you are concerned, if you think that delivery vehicles need space and you think you know a good place for it to go, please tell us that, because getting those vehicles pulled over in short-term parking really helps make the traffic flow easier, better all of the time.
If you make them 30-minute meters, you haven't solved anything.
Agreed.
Because, and that's been the plan that's been put forward as part of the revised parking in the back bay. 30-minute meters will not be occupied by UPS trucks or FedEx trucks or anybody like that. they might be occupied by cars, but that doesn't solve the problem. Double parking is a rampant, difficult issue in the Back Bay among other neighborhoods, and on that block, when you take it down to 2 lanes, it's end of ball game. And whether or not the numerical analysis shows it, the reality analysis is that the ball game will stop.
Thank you, Elliot. Councilor Durkin, did you want to weigh in? I see your hands up. Oh, hold on.
Oh, thank you so much. Sorry, I had a muting issue. I just wanted to thank everyone for their participation. I think the chat today and the way that people are able to productively communicate with city services and our city departments. I think this is the example of like the community meeting that we want to see and the engagement that we want to see. Just wanted to highlight Matt Warfield's work with parking. He was able to partner with NAB in my office to create, and this was a priority of Kenzie's office, to create more residential parking in the neighborhood. And with that being said, there have been some changes made to parking. The conversation about what we can do there, please share your feedback with both my office, Matt Warfield, and those at BTD about, I think those are areas where feedback from neighbors is incredibly important. So I just want to uplift that work. I have a member of my team on right now and I have to go, but I just wanted to say, I think this has been a really successful public meeting. I'll try to stay on for as long as I possibly can before I have to leave, but just want to say I really appreciated this meeting and I'm grateful to the neighbors of the Back Bay who have showed up today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Counselor. Dan, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the shared right turn and straight path lane
Sure.
at the corner, because I saw a lot of questions about that in the chat, so I want to make sure we cover that.
Yep. So this is the crux of the problem. This is the situation. This is how we solve to try to make the intersection safer. Right now, there's 3 lanes, one of which is a right turn lane with its own separated signal head. And what we see now is people in that right turn lane, and then we see people sneak up in the middle lane to take a double right turn, even when that signal head is red, and obviously they should not be going. This is how we get the double turners, because we have 3 lanes, because anybody who's going through, and there are people going through in every signal, it's not a lot, but it is enough. Anybody going through is in the far left lane. So there is a far left lane, there is a basically extra right turn lane in the middle, and then there is the actual right turn lane on the right. With the 2-lane cross section, what we're doing is, one, we're removing it so that there's not 2 different things happening at this intersection right now. There isn't some people going through and some people stopped. Everybody is going through or everybody is stopped. So it reduces any confusion anybody might have about what they should be doing. And more importantly, it gets rid of that second lane where people could be taking that extra right with the right turners. Because somebody who's going through is going to be stopped in that second lane, and it will no longer function as an extra free right turn lane. That's essentially what that blocks and prevents. That combined with only really one option with pedestrians crossing at the same time really makes this a lot safer and easier for everybody to navigate. It reduces confusion because there aren't lights showing you different things, and it reduces the ability for bad actors to have the ability to make these free rights that are making this intersection so dangerous.
Thanks, Dan. John, you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much. I'm really excited for these plans. Appreciate all the hard work by everyone. I just had a handful of questions about the Muger Street and Arlington Street areas. So I saw in one of the designs that the northbound cycle lane on Arlington Street to make a left turn will go, it looked like, against the flow of traffic. I can't say as a cyclist I've ever ridden in a bike lane like that. It gives me a little bit of pause. Um, I I don't know if that's an established design to have that go against the flow of traffic crossing a couple lanes. But that was certainly something that gave me a little bit of pause. And then to echo, I think Elliot's question about Amazon parking at the intersection on Muger, is that portion of the bike lane before it becomes a parking protected bike lane, is there going to be either flex posts or a hardened barrier separating the bike lane there?
Yeah, I can answer both of those questions for you. Oh, also, if you could mute yourself, I'm getting a little feedback.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
No problem. So first, or second question first, because that's easier. Yes, there will be hardened protection between that bike facility that does not have cars, so that it won't just become parking. There will be some sort of curbing there. I think we have it as concrete right now. Second is your question about that northbound left on Arlington to this space. It does look weird. I agree. But the only time that that movement is available is when there are no cars coming southbound down the Arlington Street barrel. So there are no conflicting movements. Everybody, the lefts off of Beacon are held, the left rights off of Mugar are held, and there's time for bikes to make that crossing, get around that corner and into the protected bike lane before any vehicles are allowed to come through. That time is built into it. That time is important. We cannot leave people in that space around that corner while vehicles are moving through the intersection. It's not a safe condition. So the intent of the design and the timing of the design is for people to be able to get around safely through to the protected bike lanes while vehicles are not moving in that area.
Thanks, Dan. Joan, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm with the St. Potolph neighborhood, which the St. Potolph neighborhood is actually technically is technically part of the Back Bay, even though we're kind of separated. And I have first of all, I just want to say this format is amazing. It actually feels like, actually it doesn't feel like, it is actually evident that you are taking feedback from neighborhood representatives and residents in real time and using that feedback to adjust things, and that's really impressive. And I want to thank you for that. I also really like the way that you set up the meeting in terms of projects that are underway, projects that are in design, and future projects. It's just, there's always a big confusing aspect to all this, and so that makes it very clear. My question is this, and forgive me if this is a little off topic from most of it. I just wasn't sure where I should ask this question, but I see in the St. Potolph neighborhood, we have our main intersection is at St. Potolph and West Newton. And we have been talking to the city for a very long time about making adjustments for a number of reasons and improving and upgrading that intersection. My concern is this: on the you have that it's planned, that it looks to me from that map that that section of West Newton will be indeed paved either this year or next. And I'm concerned that if you pave it, are we less likely to ever be able to get an improvement done because, hey, you guys just paved it? And I'd love your recommendation as to what I can do to further this conversation and have some attention given to that intersection as part of the plan, so that when you do repave it, perhaps there's other things you can do at the time that you're repaving it. Thanks.
So, hi, Joan. I'm Julia, and thank you so much for acknowledging the format. It does take us a lot of effort to put, put something like this together and to put it on. So just very much appreciate, and I'm glad it feels like we are listening and responding, because we are. To your question, no, we would not be like precluding any future work there. So the paving work that we're going to be doing on West Newton is in response to the deteriorating pavement there. We recognize it's in very bad shape. And the continuance of that street up onto Belvedere, where there's also a lot of utility work that's been happening.
Nonstop.
Yes, yes. So we know that that has been happening. What we're also looking at now is some development happening at the Sheridan. And so kind of when that all comes to be an opportunity all at once, which is going to be very soon. So, the utility work should be wrapping up. The development is going to be happening with the Sheridan. That's when we're going to be doing this paving. So I believe that what we have been, not me, because I was not here, but I believe elements of the city had been talking with the community about pedestrian safety improvements on West Newton. Is that what you're referring to? Yes.
Yes.
So something like a raised crossing or tightening the intersection, something like that,
yes,
would absolutely not be precluded by paving. And I would offer that our team, we can follow up with you just to kind of see where we're at with those designs, if they had been advanced past anything of a conceptual design in the past. And, when we do repaving, that is the opportunity for us to do, restriping or anything like that. That's a quick build element. We could look at if there's any simple changes that we could do during the repaving effort.
Who should I stay in contact with, Julia, about that?
Yes. Okay. So Anne, this is where Anne comes in. Who should Joan talk to, Anne?
You can email me because my name's easy. It's ANNE.ROACH@boston.gov, and then I will connect you to our community engagement specialist who can work with you moving forward.
Great. Thanks. I really appreciate that. And thanks again for tonight. It's obvious that a lot of work goes into this, and it's appreciated.
Thanks, Joan. So I'm going to call on Patricia. Oh, hold on. You should be able to unmute now. There you go.
Hi, I'm Bob, and this is Pat O'Neill, and so I just got volunteered as a spokesperson. We live at the corner of Berkeley and Comm Ave for about the last 15 years. To follow Anne's early instructions, I would just say I agree with several things. One, Nathaniel, thanks for the thoughtful, informative presentation. Fantastic. I agree with Joan's compliments about this format. I agree 100% with everything that Elliot said, if anyone can remember all those things. And lastly, I appreciate your efforts I'm a walker, biker, runner, and I'm afraid to get trying to get to Fieldwood Bridge. So I skip at night. Now I go down Dartmouth. But if you could get me across there without me waiting 5 minutes or killing me, that's great. I don't have the solutions. The ones you said sound like they're good ones. But kind of my comment, and really it's a question. I don't have the solution to it. And I made a comment in the chat room as part of this. There are behavioral issues that, regardless of how we think the design is going to work, we have people who drive cars, walk, run, bike, scooters, so forth. And right now, again, we live in the corner here. We can kind of see what's going on. We're out there all the time. And people are going, we talk about one-way bike lanes, two-way bike lanes. People use one-way bike lanes as two-way bike lanes, and they're going to continue to do it. I don't see anything that's going to cause, I don't see the concept. Why aren't they all two-way? Because that's just the way people use them. It's amazing how many motorbikes, well, the bikes themselves, they go slower than the motorbikes, but they can knock you over as well. But pedestrians are not safe on the sidewalk here in the Back Bay, and it's getting worse, particularly since Chick-fil-A went in and all the delivery people. It's really a bit chaotic. It's starting to feel like, I won't name the country, but you go to third world countries and people just do whatever they want. And so that has gotten progressively worse over time. I don't think the bike lanes are helping that. I think bike lanes are, I'm a biker, so I like the bike lanes. I feel safer there. But, the people that are the bikers tend to be the real bikers. They tend to do the right things. They know what they should do. But it's chaotic. And of course, Nathaniel referred to, behavioral issues. The city's, cluttered with litter. Honking runs from like 4 o'clock to 2:30. I mean, it's constant. It's constant. And we were in Ireland for a couple of weeks and there wasn't any honking. Well, they got rules against it, except at certain times and certain circumstances. You can't litter and they'll charge you $300 if you litter. I understand that's not your problem, but it impacts all the streets. Sidewalks, bike lanes, littered with trash. People start getting mad at each other. The aggressive behaviors of pedestrians versus motorists. I know we're talking about a societal problem here, not a traffic, but the traffic when it gets bad, like Comm Ave every day. That was something, Nathaniel, one of the few things you didn't mention in your analysis. Comm Ave gets backed up from Arlington, going towards the park, Arlington to Dartmouth every day. And then the intersections, people just go into the intersections, block them, inch their way through, get stuck, and then the horns, and everybody just, I actually have an apartment on the first floor. It is just unbelievable. I wear earplugs during the day. So anyway, those are things that are problems that I don't have solutions for. I would like to have some discussions, and I will follow up on whether the lead time on a green light is helpful. I think in some situations it is. That certainly would not help at the corner of Berkeley and Newbury. Newbury's got tons of pedestrian traffic, and I'm one of them. The pedestrians can get across, but the cars can't turn because there's no right-hand turn from Newbury to Berkeley. So those cars get stuck. They either have to encroach upon the pedestrians just to get one car through, or they just sit in the intersection. Again, that's another one where I like the green or the lead time in certain circumstances, and others we need different signals. So sorry to go so long, but those are my comments. I'd appreciate if anybody's got ideas on the behavioral issues.
Sure, I can answer your question. Or sorry, did somebody else want to? No? Okay. Bob, I can answer your question here. The answer is it's not easy. It's never going to be easy. And the problem here is there's always going to be a number of people who are not going to follow the rules of the road. And when those people are put on motorized devices or vehicles, they suddenly become dangerous to all of the other users of the road, especially when they are not using the road correctly. I cannot design for people to use the road incorrectly. If I start doing that, then people start using it more incorrectly. And then I have to redesign it for people to use it more incorrectly. And we get stuck in a downward spiral that just ends in a terrible situation for everyone because I'm trying to make the road work for people who are not following the rules. I have to design the road in the best way possible for the most people to use it safely. And I have to design it to prohibit and discourage dangerous behavior as much as possible. Part of that is creating a full and connected bike network so that people have options to do something safely that they don't do now. The other part is to get the vehicles through an intersection today or in the future that we do today so that people can still do that, and to make it so that pedestrians have time and space to cross a intersection in a reasonable manner and a reasonable amount of time. It is always a balancing act. It is always going to be hard. It is our job, what we are trying to do here. We aren't always going to get it right, and people aren't always going to follow the law, but I can't make it easier for people to not follow the law. It's just going to bring us the wrong direction.
Yeah, Dan, can you hear me?
Yes.
I really wasn't targeting you with my questions. I don't think that it can be done alone. I do think that there's some things you can continue to do so that we don't deal with literally just gridlocks. The intersections are just gridlocked. There are some things we could talk about that I would do differently. But I do think it's a combination of our city planners, maybe the Boston Police Department, maybe some advertisements, maybe some street signs, maybe some fines for non-compliance like you find in other countries. So I don't think, Dan, you could possibly solve these problems. And I'm not suggesting that to you. If you thought I was talking to you, I think it applies to all of us on the call. So I know it's a little bit off point, but I'd appreciate if there are ways and people you could partner with so that the answer isn't just crap happens and actually there's a lot of people that do the wrong things and nobody stops them. No one even discourages them. No one actually, they don't even know it's wrong.
So this is obviously a whole ecosystem of different
Thank you.
policies and different players. And I did note that Councillor Durkin mentioned in the chat having met with DoorDash and Grubhub and Uber Eats. I also know that we have a whole team of folks here in the Streets Cabinet who are working on curbside access and delivery, and our leadership also is very much aware of this issue. And one of the things, as Dan mentioned, that we can do is within this ecosystem, we are working on designing safer streets. And ultimately, that does lead us in a different direction while we are also engaging in these higher level policy discussions. So with our kind of limited scope here tonight being kind of to talk about street design stuff, we do absolutely acknowledge your comments, and we are working on them, and when there are opportunities to be involved with those conversations, I'm sure you'll hear about them. And I'll pass it back to Anne.
And you can call on us as people to help.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Susan, please go ahead with your question. If I can ask, oh, did that work? Can you unmute? Okay, good.
Hi, I want to thank you for listening to us over this very complicated and angsty conversations over the past few years. And I suggest maybe mobility, which evidently means bike lanes. Maybe we could have a meeting like this about the traffic problems that are backing up and causing pollution all on my street, which is Berkeley Street. I wanted to ask if the bike lanes will have lights, that there'll be pedestrian right-of-way notices in the bike lanes. So San Francisco has signals for their bikes to enable turns, and I wondered if that's part of this construction. The other question I have is there doesn't seem to be anything being talked about in front of the Boston Public Library between Copley Square, like on Dartmouth Street. Where's the proposed bike lane there? From someone who lived here in the 70s said the sidewalk was expanded on Dartmouth Street on the left-hand side. Why isn't a portion of that taken for the new bike lanes so that you can preserve all the parking on Dartmouth Street? That's the only sidewalk in the Back Bay that isn't that wide, and it's because part of the street was taken to build it in the 70s. So, I want to know what about Dartmouth Street construction and the Boston Public Library, Copley Square, and why you have to take away that parking on Dartmouth Street.
Okay, there was a lot of questions there, so I apologize if I don't get all of them. Great.
Can we start with signals, bike signals?
Yes, that's so. First off, at the AB block at Beacon and Berkeley, there are no planned bike signals currently because they will not be necessary to provide safe and effective movements for bikes that do not conflict with pedestrians or vehicles. The bikes going westbound, excuse me, which is the only movement that bikes make in the intersection, go on the green with the vehicles that are happening at that point. So it is not necessary to have a bike signal there. After that, the bikes are past the pedestrian crosswalk. So when they are crossing the street, they will currently be using the pedestrian crossing beacon, and there will be no conflicts with pedestrians because they will be past it. They will go along with the pedestrians and then take a left. That being said, it would be more legible to have a bike light for that crossing of Beacon Street. And if we have time and space in the future, it would be a good addition to really nail home when the bikes should be going there. So it is not necessary to make this function safe and keep bikes separated from pedestrians. It could be a good addition in the future as well to help with clarity. Nathaniel?
Yeah, I was just going to say we do use bike signals where we're giving bikes a time to go that is not the same time as vehicles. So since bikes will be going westbound on the same green as cars, it's not necessary, but we certainly can use them also to provide additional clarity around when and where to go. So we can absolutely take that into consideration.
I'm really concerned about pedestrians crossing bike lanes, and there are no lights. I have seen bikes fly through the ordinary signals like they don't belong, like they don't have to obey traffic signals, and you're crossing the street. So I'm really concerned that there's no compliance factor around bicycles in bike lanes, stopping at intersections and allowing pedestrians, which Back Bay is a pedestrian neighborhood, safety when these protected bike lanes look like that's all theirs and there's no intersections.
Yes. So sorry, Dan, you want to?
No, you.
So bike signals are one of the tools we can use to help increase compliance. We also have public information campaigns that happen regularly with our partners throughout different city agencies. So as with the previous discussion, really this is part of an ecosystem approach of building different ways to get better compliance with the rules of the road. I know that there were a couple other questions in there. There was one about a bike lane to the Boston Public Library. So the Dartmouth Street bike lane does go as far as Boylston Street. There's a northbound bike lane on Dartmouth Street from Stewart or St. James. So that will remain in place. Is that something that, Dan, you want to speak to, or anyone else?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again? Answering another.
I'm actually not sure I understand.
What I'm really concerned about is that there was a proposal to close Dartmouth Street between the Boston Public Library and Copley. And it looks to me like no design work has been done on these bike lanes in that particular block. And if you do that, all the traffic off the Mass Pike will then go down Berkeley Street, which is already backed up. So I'm trying to find out from you if you didn't put the bike lane in because you're reserving the possibility of closing Dartmouth Street.
Part of this, none of this design included closing Dartmouth Street south of Boylston Street. If we were to do that, that would require a separate analysis and understanding how that would change the traffic patterns as they go around. That would not happen without a whole separate something similar to this to explain what the changes are necessary. And frankly, if we close Dartmouth Street, we probably are going to require more changes to the network around it too. That's a big change. So this design does not include putting a bike facility on Dartmouth Street there. It does not include closing it there. Just the existing unprotected lane that's currently there will be able to continue through onto Dartmouth Street.
And we are not specifically reserving space for any future changes on that block. It was Boylston Street is a natural place to end it because there is a soon to be constructed bike lane there that folks can connect to in either direction. If we were to extend it or do any changes on that block in front of the BPL between St. James Ave and Dartmouth Street, that would be a completely different conversation dedicated entirely to that. And it would be ongoing, I'm sure, well beyond the scope of the design changes that we're talking about tonight.
So the other thing is on Stewart Street, where you showed the lanes and you showed the new bike lane crossing at that intersection at Stewart and Dartmouth. When you come off the Mass Pike there are no lanes marked. You're sort of like, where do I go and where do I choose to go? There are no lanes marked on that road, which contributes to the dangerousness for bicycle riders, pedestrians, and cars. And so since you were changing that intersection, the natural idea would be that it would flow up Dartmouth Street for those people to get up Dartmouth Street from the Orange Line and the commuter rail. But this plan has nothing there.
That is correct. That is not a thing that we are considering in the network right now. Doesn't mean it won't be in the future, but it will require further and more analysis that may require other changes to do so.
Additionally, to probably most of that off-ramp is Mass DOT property, and while we do collaborate with them all the time on many things, it is a different process and requires much more conversation with them to make any changes. So we can certainly look at any additional clarifying markings we can add within our right-of-way. Dan can take a look at it. I can't make any guarantees on what it will be, but we can certainly look at it.
The design will have more clarifying markings as well, at least the one that I have now, which is still open to change.
Thank you. Thank you for this meeting.
Of course. Steve, you're up.
There you go. Thank you for the presentation. I am a recreational as well as a bike share bicyclist. I care about biking. I care about being safe when I bike. Having said that, Dan said at one point, how do we try to make the Beacon and Berkeley intersection safer? That was the question. And he said, with the 2 lanes, it will make it safer. And that is apparently, as Dan sees it, because that will cause the present middle lane drivers, or some of them, prevent them from taking the right onto Storrow Drive and jamming things up. Getting rid of that middle lane only puts those drivers in the second lane, the one of the 2 lanes. They will continue doing the same thing, because what backs up the cars turning onto Storrow Drive isn't the pedestrian walk sign. Every now and then there's a pedestrian who is coming across that blocks it up. But what blocks it up is cars coming on Berkeley and coming into the intersection and preventing the cars that are on Berkeley, or on Beacon, I mean, from taking that right turn. And reducing the lanes from 3 to 2 is going to compound the problem, not reduce the problem. And that will back things up all the way to Arlington. One more comment before a question. Bringing bikes into the Beacon-Berkeley intersection was one of the primary reasons the AB block was not included in the bike lanes back in 2018 or whenever it was. And it's because that intersection and the Mugar Way Arlington intersections are 2 of the most clogged, congested, dangerous intersections in Back Bay, if not the most, if you exclude Mass Ave, which, by the way, has bike lanes running both directions unprotected. And I don't know how things are going there, but they're unprotected. And with that being a reason for not doing it in 2018, and there being nothing but increased traffic now, vehicular traffic, the danger and the congestion at those 2 intersections is worse than it was then. So adding bicyclists of any sort, whether coming down Berkeley or coming down Beacon, and whatever you do with signaling or anything else is going to simply worsen the situation. And to try to explain why that's not so doesn't ring rational, just said. Now, the question I have is that the bicycles that are coming down Beacon Street from City Side, from Charles, that direction, theoretically at least, if the bicyclists are doing what the law requires, the bicycles will be in the bike lane, the protected bike lane along the public garden. And when they reach the intersection of Arlington and Mugar Way, your plan has them pausing to figure their way through that intersection through two crosswalks, which whatever you do with it, commuter bicyclists are not known for their willingness to follow the rules. Now, I'm not saying drivers of vehicles are either, but bicyclists certainly aren't. And if those bicyclists come down legally in the bike lane, protected bike lane along the public garden, they can avoid the two most dangerous intersections in Back Bay, the one at Arlington and Mugar and the one at Beacon and Berkeley, by making a left in the protected lane and going to Commonwealth Avenue. And they're entering the protected, or not the protected, but the bike lane that exists right now that is widely used. I use it all the time myself. And it's right beside grassy area, not beside cars, not beside buildings, houses, nobody walking into the lane. They can do that, and they'll be on that bike lane before they'd be across the Arlington-Mugar dangerous intersection. And for the city not to be seriously considering encouraging the cyclists to do that and then continue on Commonwealth past Berkeley into the same bike lanes, the city's plan is now directing the bicyclists on Berkeley Street who are coming from the south to get onto the existing bike lane on Commonwealth Avenue and continue on westward. If they want to go past Mass Ave, they go under the bridge and go past Mass Ave. If they want to take a left and go, well, they're not going to go south of Mass Ave, but if they want to go north of Mass Ave, they do that from Commonwealth. Or they can continue on, take a right on Dartmouth. And so I haven't seen traffic studies that show what has happened on Commonwealth during the many years now we've had a bike lane there in terms of safety and accidents and cyclists getting injured or anybody else getting injured because of that bike lane. But I find it to be a very safe one, as it is. And if that's wrong, okay. But I'll end this by leaving it for Dan and others to answer that basic question, why that very reasonable, it seems to me, alternative is not being seriously discussed. I'll end it by saying that the traffic studies and analysis that have been done were done a year and a half ago, and circumstances have changed. And if next fall you can do a baseline study and analysis based upon the study of the intersections you're talking about in Commonwealth Avenue, that could very well help in a discussion of whether the otherwise good aim that all of the bicyclists and all of the transportation folks have of making a connected bike path through the city of Boston. It works in 90% of the places you're trying to do it. In this particular block, it doesn't work. It makes things much more dangerous for everybody involved. And just to say you want to do it because you look at a piece of paper and it shows a nice straight line all the way down Beacon is not reason enough to not seriously consider a reasonable.
Steve, thank you. I want to try to get into some of your questions. So just zooming back to the big picture, we have a disconnected bike network in this section. So as you mentioned, we had a street safety project on Beacon Street that was finished in 2018, in which we put in a separated bike lane on the north side of Beacon Street from Berkeley West to Mass Ave. We also have a one-way currently protected bike lane going around the public garden. And essentially we have a block-long gap that does not allow folks to connect from point A to point B. So that is the place we're starting from when we're trying to, when we're talking about closing this gap and putting a bike lane on this section. We fully acknowledge that this is a complicated block with a lot of traffic. And ultimately, our ability to move cars through here, whether they're coming from Berkeley or Beacon Street, is really governed by the pinch point getting onto Sturrow Drive. So we are working kind of sometimes within the margins of all of the regional traffic that filters through our city streets and through your neighborhood to get to on-ramps to highways. So when we make adjustments to signal timing and the number of lanes of intersection at an intersection, we take all of those things into account. So some of the changes that we've made have been responsive to the concerns that have been raised by folks such as yourself in the community. And one of those is moving the bike lane to the south side of Beacon Street so that there is no conflict with the right turning drivers onto Sturrow Drive. That's one. Two, I understand that the Arlington Street and Ugar Way Beacon Street intersection does look a little complicated. And the truth of the matter is that it is. And with the goals in mind of creating better, safer connections for pedestrians and bicyclists to the Fiedler Footbridge, as well as keeping traffic moving through this area, I and my team, including Dan and others on this call, have spent countless hours sketching out many different varieties of alternatives for this intersection. And the outcome is really trying to accommodate all the needs we know we have to accommodate. So as you recall, we were initially proposing a bike lane going up Berkeley Street along the left side that would then connect to Beacon Street as our first proposed alternative. We are no longer proposing that. So in order to get folks to that connection, they have to go a different way. And so that's where the block between A and B comes into play. So understanding your concerns and hearing those, we are taking into account all the feedback we've heard and that we have to increase access for bikes throughout this neighborhood, as well as, again, balancing all of the important safety needs we know we have and improving conditions for pedestrians pretty much everywhere we go. I'd like to move on to the next question. I will send it back to you, Anne.
Thanks, Nathaniel. Diana, why don't you go ahead with your question?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Cauldron. I'm a 23 resident of actually Beacon Hill. However, I use this stretch of Beacon Street almost daily by walking or driving. I certainly used it about 15 years, twice or three times a day. So I'm very familiar with it. And thank you for all your thoughtful input and analysis. I guess I echo Steve's comments, Steve Young's comments about the data. And my concern is that the proposed design, the data that was looked at, I believe was 2022. And is that correct? And I would just urge that perhaps that data is looked at again before implementing this design and really carefully considered. I also appreciate these types of calls, and I would hope that they would continue, I would suggest, on a quarterly basis, because transportation changes. I mean, in our city for hundreds of years, the streets have gone different ways. We've added bike lanes. And now, as we can see in other major cities, the influx of these mopeds, I don't think is going to change. If you go to New York City, they are proliferating. It's dangerous to cross the street. I think that we should take this very seriously. The fact that they're allowed in bike lanes, the fact that we often cannot see that these mopeds, how they're registered, licensed, how to report them. They're going on sidewalks. I've videotaped them all over the city. It's very, very dangerous. I'm worried about someone getting hurt. So while I appreciate the bike lanes, I think we have to be concerned that they're going to turn into distribution lanes because they will be accessible by these delivery people, and they will be utilized by them more and more. And I think we need to be aware of how that's going to impact the regular bicyclists. My second question is regarding the U-turn that currently is allowed and quite useful actually for many of our residents when you turn off Muger Way by the Fiedler footbridge. I have a question. Will that remain in place? And then my third question really has to do with the snow removal of these bike lanes. And we've been lucky not to have, we haven't had a lot of snow the last couple of years, but I'm just curious how, when, especially that A to B block, when it's narrowed down to 2 lanes, which I agree with Steve, it's just going to be a mess. Both lanes are going to try to turn, and the Berkeley people coming into Muger Way already clog up the intersection. So it's going to be, I think, quite a mess. But with the snow removal, how would that work? Would it then impact the parking, taking away parking on that block? How quickly it would be removed? And so I would just end with saying thank you. And also I hope that there's a lot of oversight on when this is implemented and how it's affecting the residents driving, walking, and riding their bikes. Because I feel like these bike lanes go in and then I don't hear anything. I don't hear any impact about how many people are using them. The data doesn't really reflect an increase in bicycle usage. We know about 2% of Boston City residents bike to work. But many of us walk, and then 43% drive to work. So I think we just need to be realistic in the expectations and then not clogging up traffic further than already exists. Thank you.
So there's a few questions there. I'll try to answer them as accurately as I can. First, as was mentioned in our presentation, pedestrians are always first in all of these. We don't consider other modes until pedestrians are safe and have a way to cross the street legally. That's number one. It's always going to be number one at every new intersection we design. We have a lot that aren't there, but we are trying to get there. 2, snow removal. I meet with the team in charge of snow removal every week. We talk about all of these. We talk about every issue that any change to the street could come up. We make sure that everything that we are doing works with the people who are doing snow removal and the people who are doing street sweeping. A lot of our details and the ways we build things are based around fitting vehicles that keep our streets clean and safe when there are snow events or when there is a lot of debris, functioning and using the street quickly. So those will still be able to use the street in a safe and efficient manner. Apologies. As for your U-turn, that has not been taken off of the table. I just ask that if you are doing that, please watch for any pedestrians who might be trying to make it across the sidewalk during that event, which may or may not be allowed to, but it is potentially a dangerous maneuver. The last question was about looking at counts. I can't confirm that we will do counts yet because that is not my decision to make. We have heard a lot of people asking us to do counts more in the future. I can't promise that, but we can look into how we may be able to do that. So the answer is we've heard you want more counts, you want this to be specific, and we will do our best to look at that. And that kind of dovetails into, well, how might counts change what's happening at the Berkeley and Beacon Street intersection? And the answer to that is that intersection has been simplified so much with this design that there are functionally 2 pushes and pulls on this intersection. There is the vehicles on Berkeley Street and there are the vehicles on Beacon Street. The counts will tell us how much green time to give to each of those to try to balance the vehicles going through. At some point, most days though, Starro Drive will back up. Starro Drive will back up into the intersection. People coming up Berkeley Street will not be able to make it through in time. It will stop Beacon Street. The intersection will break. There is nothing we can do with that because there is nothing I can do to push more cars through onto Starro Drive. Starro Drive will always be the limiting factor for getting large vehicles through this intersection because in the worst times, it's going to back up that ramp and it's just going to stop. And that sucks, but there is nothing that I can do about that. Any updates and counts is really just going to change who we give green to go down that chute more. But at the end of the day, there is still going to be breaks And that's okay. It happens sometimes. It's frustrating. It would be better if it didn't. But that is what we have here with a off-ramp to a highway. I hope that answered your question thoroughly.
Thank you, Dan. Ryan, your question, please.
Oh, all right. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a camera attached, so I can't turn that on. But yeah, I just wanted to. I have like a couple quick points. One, I really appreciate the design that got presented for Dartmouth Street. That's the path that I use. I think almost every time I go into the city, and the current unprotected lane is it's incredibly uncomfortable. It's full of holes. You're crossing over a right turn lane at some point, so I really hope to see this two-way design like come to fruition eventually. And then I just had, I guess, two questions. The first one, are there like physical barriers around the intersections on Beacon Street where the bike lanes are going to be? And it looks like there's some amount of daylighting near the bike lanes on the northern side. Is there like, I don't know, can you put potted plants or something? Because I can't count the number of times I've seen cars just kind of like, I've seen people parallel park in the crosswalk. And that just puts everyone in an unsafe spot.
So to answer that question, what I'm going to be trying to do with the design is put concrete barriers in, and those are short. They are easily walk overable by pedestrians, and they have gaps for anybody who has mobility needs to get through them as well. And they do a much better job at keeping vehicles out of the bike lane. I can't promise that that will happen because construction is hard, but I would like to. The other option is we will be putting flex posts there, and we are aligning all of the travel lanes to not be crossing the bike facility. And so that really helps keep vehicles outside of the bike lane. And thirdly, there is already parked vehicles along the bike lane. And a lot of times where you get the non-compliance is when there isn't a parking lane. It's much easier to pull in over the flex posts.
Yes,
they won't be afforded that ability because there will be parked vehicles there. So it's less important to have the concrete because there's already vehicles physically protecting the bikes on the south side.
Okay, yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, I couldn't tell on the map if there was kind of markings around the intersections for physical objects that would be there, so I just wanted to confirm. And then the other question, I think this is going to echo a lot of people's points, is just general enforcement. I know people have mentioned double parking and stuff, but I think a really common one is people blocking the box and then inevitably blocking the crosswalk, which makes pedestrians in the middle of the intersection. And secondly, the bus lanes, especially on St. James Street right now, are pretty non-existent because there's just always delivery vehicles and Ubers. I mean, I've seen the bus take 3 minutes to get through that stretch that could be 10 seconds. Is there any work like with like Boston Police or that the city can do otherwise to enforce these things?
So
hi folks.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Chief, your audio is a little.
Something's off with the audio.
Can you hear me
there
now?
Go. Now you're good.
All right.
You're good.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I was in the other breakout room and so jumped back into this conversation. So, enforcement in general is something we hear a lot about. And, quite frankly, it's this is a challenge, right? We have, we see a lot of vehicles and street users of all kinds who break the rules, and in some cases in ways that create real safety hazards for people. There is some ongoing conversation that's happening with the Boston Police Department in particular about some of the rise of scooters that have been operating in ways that are particularly unsafe in pedestrian areas. And I think they're working on formulating some approaches to addressing that. When it comes to bus lanes, there is a bill under consideration at the state level right now that would allow for photo enforcement of bus lanes. So cameras mounted on the bus that could issue by mail tickets to people who are using the bus lane as a parking lane. Many other jurisdictions, including New York City, Los Angeles, have done this with great effect. And so it's something that if the state legislature authorizes it, I think the MBTA would be keen to pursue. On the broader topic of traffic enforcement, I think this is an ongoing conversation that the city, the transportation side of the house is having with the Boston Police Department about what their capacity is to do enforcement and where and how it could be most effective. I'll be candid and say I don't think the city has sort of ever published a clear statement about how much they're going to do, where they're going to do it, when they're going to do it. But it is part, we believe it is part of the functional, safe transportation system. And so we want to make sure that we're providing the support to the police around that. Lastly, some things can be enforced by the Boston Transportation Department, not moving violations, but parking violations. And so we have been aggressively trying to staff up our parking enforcement personnel so that we can provide more people on the street who can issue tickets for folks who are parking in crosswalks, in bus lanes, in bike lanes, blocking hydrants, all of the things that we know create safety issues and mobility issues for people in the city.
Thank you. Allie, I'm going to ask you to unmute here if it works. There you go.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the open forum here and the moderation and I will say that some of the unique designs and solutions are coming up with are interesting and appreciate the effort. I just want to reflect back to when the mayor had made a decision a year ago, or actually last fall, I believe one of her principles was when she was deciding not to bring the bike lane from Comm Ave down to Beacon Street was because of safety and congestion. And when we look at street design, probably in a city, you probably want to lead with street safety and street congestion issues as the paramount leading principles. However, when I listened to, I don't know if it was Dan responding to Steve Young, we hear the word connectivity, connection as a leading principle. And while it's nice to connect bike lanes, the net difference, we were asking, the street design to really just leverage the existing Dartmouth Street pathway via Comm Ave. And it was really just a net 35, 40 seconds out of the way for a biker. I can't believe that, this is such an inconvenience for a biker to not be able to bike that way, out of their way, and withholding, the principles that would be more paramount to designing streets around safety and congestion. Secondly, to that, I see the result here with the bike lane on Beacon Street landing on the south side, and then the bikes coming across Berkeley, okay? And then they'll have to cross Beacon with pedestrians. I really think this is going to be quite dangerous because a pedestrian, when they cross over Beacon Street from the Berkeley corner, okay, onto the north side of Beacon Street, that pedestrian has two options: to go left and then to go right, towards Arlington Street. I don't think a pedestrian is going to know exactly where they're going to go left or right while they're walking across the street. I think you're going to have a lot of stress point on that corner where a pedestrian might be turning right and a bicyclist will be turning left. So I have some serious concerns for safety of both the bicyclist and the commuter on foot, et cetera. So I'll just leave it at there, but I have some serious concerns about that. And then lastly, I am all about data. I come from healthcare. Data is king. Data drives every decision you should make. I don't think making street design decisions on 2-year-old data is the best idea here. I do believe that we should take fresh data counts, okay, and take a look at the impact when we are at high peak volume and high delivery volume going on with all of the Uber, Amazon drivers, USPS drivers, FedEx, everything. We're often already down to a single lane on Beacon Street, literally a single lane. So I'm not sure this squeeze that you have in mind on Beacon Street is going to help that in any more. I really think it's actually going to be counterintuitive to relieving congestion in the city, especially in this stretch. I'll leave there, and I do thank you for the forum and for the creative design, but I do have safety concerns, which is always should be number one, and I do have congestion concerns as well.
Thank you for your comments. I just want to, I'll hand it over to Dan in 1 second, but I just want to reiterate that paramount to every street design project that we do, pedestrians are always first. Safety is always first too. And I know we've been talking a lot about bike lanes, a lot about connectivity here in this meeting, but if we drill down to kind of the scope of work that we're talking about, that is part of the work that we are trying to do, is to connect two stubs of the bike network that currently are not connecting to each other and are thus forming a gap. It would be kind of akin to if, Fenway did not connect to Sturrow Drive via the Boker overpass. A lot of people would be saying, how do we get those 2 points to connect? How do we get users to move between these 2 points? It's kind of the same thing here. It's a different mode. And so that's kind of why we're in the weeds on that particular topic. But again, pedestrian safety is always paramount. So I know Dan kind of can talk a little bit more about the signalization questions you had, and how pedestrians and bicyclists interact within that intersection, if you want to take it down.
Sure. So like Nathaniel said, paramount first is always safety. And the second concern is congestion another concern at this intersection is congestion. And the concern is, are we going to be causing more congestion? Is the bike lane going to be causing more congestion? The bike lane itself will not be causing more congestion. The bike lane is totally separate from the vehicle movements, and nothing that the bike does is overlapped to cause more congestion for vehicles. It is time to go with vehicle movements, and then it is time to go with pedestrian movements. So, reiterate, the bike lane does not cause congestion. The congestion that is caused in this intersection is the backups on Starrow Drive that eventually spill over and reach into this intersection, and that's what causes all of the backups on Berkeley and Boylston. So the first priority for congestion is to make sure that there is always the maximum amount of vehicles going down that throat, which is 19 feet wide. It is not even technically 2 lanes, even though it is used as 2 lanes. And we make sure that we are always fitting the most amount of vehicles down that lane to relieve congestion as best as possible. That being said, before we do that, we need to make sure that pedestrians can cross the street safely, and we need to make sure that bikes can cross the street safely and not conflict with pedestrians or vehicles. Both of those things can happen without getting below the maximum amount of vehicles that we can fit down that throat to Storrow Drive. That number is fixed. We will get as many through there as we can, and then there is still time left over for pedestrians and cyclists to move safely through here. So as we can see here in phase 1, bicycles can cross the intersection. At no point will they conflict with vehicles or pedestrians. They have their own space. It is separated by several feet on both sides. It is marked in green to be very obvious that it is there. Second phase, if it is pushed, which it does not have to be, bikes will cross the street and take a left while pedestrians are crossing to the right of them. At no point here is there a conflict between legally operating cyclists and legally operating pedestrians, or legally operating vehicles for that matter. Everybody has a safe and separated area to cross. The third, if the second one is not pressed, is what goes on next, and the bikes and the pedestrians have what's called a leading pedestrian interval. I believe for this crossing it's 7 seconds, and so that means that before the vehicles are let go through to Starrow Drive and to Beacon westbound, the bikes and pedestrians have 7 seconds to start crossing the street. That is more than enough time for any bikes to cross and start heading west, and it's more than enough time for even the slowest of pedestrians to get well out and be visible for any left turning vehicles. And the right turning, there is no right turning vehicles, so that pedestrian, there is no pedestrian conflict there. So again, from the top, safety is paramount for this, followed by maximizing the amount of vehicles that can get through that throat, which is causing all of the congestion. And we find that we can still provide safe and protected crossings for all users while still maximizing the amount of vehicles that can physically fit through that choke point.
Thanks, Dan. And then I just also to note the question about the recency of the data. Yes, we hear those concerns. We hear this question about validating with more recent data. As Dan mentioned earlier when this question came up, what that data is going to probably lead to is, if any changes at all, some nominal change to the number of seconds that either of the green phase gets. It's not going to greatly impact how the signal phase option or how the signal phasing works. And the limiting factor, again, is how many cars are queuing up on both approaches trying to get onto Sturrow Drive. Thank you for your comments, Anne.
I think we have one last hand raised. Stephen, I'm going to ask you to unmute here. If it works.
There we go. So thank you. First of all, I would just like to reiterate everybody's comment that this has been the most productive conversation that I have had to date on this subject, and the most elucidating. So that's my appreciation. I think everybody else agrees with that. And I would add that I think your proposed plan, in particular the changes on the AB block, is probably the best that you can do under the circumstances, given the pressures of all of the cars, pedestrians, bikes, etc., everybody who's coming together in this block. But I have to tell you that I think at the end of the day, the comments about data-driven decisions is really the answer here. And Dan can do magic with what he's done, but if he's still trying to put 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag, AB block is going to break. And I would argue that the AB block is already broken even before you try and impose a bike lane on it. So my problem at this point is I don't know how you're ever going to solve this. I know that there's been lots of comments about enforcement. I love the idea of more enforcements because I live on this corner, and the amount of honking and dangerous behavior that I see on this block is out of control. But all of that is a result of a struggle in the design to accommodate the amount of traffic going through this block in the first place. Let me just offer a radical solution which no one will accept, but I think it will illustrate exactly the challenge that we have here. If you really wanted to solve this problem, you would close the entrance to Starrow. And that would remove most of the traffic from this block, and it would solve all the problems that you're trying to solve and give you the opportunity to put a bike lane in. My guess is you will never do that. But if you really want to solve this problem and connect this bike lane, close the entrance to Starrow. I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. Who's closing?
I think we've reached the end of the questions. Yes, that is a radical solution. I think that highlights the thing that you said earlier, which is that we are trying in many ways to solve for space of how many cars, how much space these cars take up moving through this block. And that is what engineers such as Dan do on a daily basis. And I guess I'll leave it there. I don't know if anyone else on the city side, either Julia or the chief, Deputy Chief Campbell or Chief Franklin Hodge want to say anything here.
Sure. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Stephen, appreciate your comments and the reality check that you bring. Dan is an excellent engineer. He does work a lot of magic. But yes, I think that even couching any change that we make to any street, we are not starting from a place of perfection. So I appreciate your comment and, just recognizing that we're starting from a system that has challenges every day, and we're trying to make things better. And we are a team of professionals that are dedicated to this work. We're doing our best to make things incrementally better all around, but we are certainly nowhere near perfect. So just appreciate that comment. I'll hand it to the chief. Take us out.
I will just close briefly because it's 9 o'clock and say thank you to everybody for sticking on this call, for sharing your feedback, for the spirited back and forth, but also, for giving us a chance to show our work and to have, your perspective and your response to that be something that we can consider as we figure out next steps here. So I think we have some work to do to kind of integrate all the things that we've heard. We want to keep dialogue going, but we hope to come back to the community with some some responses to some of the things, and to look at especially some of the elements of this that are newer, to say what further changes might we look at, or alternatives or approaches that we can bring that are responsive to what we heard here tonight. So I think really just most of all, thank you. These projects, the work we do is at its best when we go through this process, as time intensive and as kind of high energy as it can sometimes be. Your input, your presence, your feedback helps us make all the work that we do better. So I very much appreciate it, and thank you. I think with that, we're going to close this meeting. We'll have lots of stuff posted on the website soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night.